Welcome, game dev adventurer, to the Indie Game Lunch Hour. Today we're talking with Buddy Sola about Indiefication, whatever the heck that means.
The Indie Game Lunch Hour.
In our live magical podcast, we give game developers the chance to hear stories of breaking in from industry experts, as well as directly ask them questions about their areas of expertise in the second half of each episode. This is a mostly unedited recording of a weekly event we host in our Discord, so feel free to swing by and join us for the next one. I love seeing all the dancing emojis in the chat from the podcast intro. We'd love to have you in the next one. There's links to join down below. As always, I am Willem Delventhal, your host and the headmaster of the Indie Game Academy and the Purple Wizard of Games, and joining me today is Buddy Sola. Buddy, how you doing today? What are you having for lunch?
Listen, I'm having the breakfast of champions. It's Pacific time. I'm in LA, so I'm on Pacific time. It's 9 a.m. for me. So I just have a super strong cup of Irish black tea, and that's my morning. That's what I'm having for, I guess, lunch, breakfast, whatever you want to call it.
Beautiful, amazing. I mean, that's all you need. I am just sipping on coffee today. It's about 12:05 for me. I probably won't eat until like 2. I really just like to, shock the insides with as much
that is relatable. Yeah, I have just a bunch of leftovers. I have my partner last night made homemade chicken tikka masala. Okay, I'm looking forward to that for lunch. Does that count, you guys?
Incredible. So I neglected to mention this in the intro, as I normally do, but Buddy is the head of marketing at Akupara Games. Who are the creators of a couple of different games, including Rainworld, Grime, Etherborn, and Star Vikings Forever. Welcome to the show, Buddy. I'm kind of pumped to talk about this, and I'm also very curious what the hell Indiefication means.
Yeah, Indiefication. I don't really remember how this came up, because when we were talking about doing the podcast, you maybe asked me for something, and I said this is a term that I use a lot. I use the term Indiefication a lot. When I'm talking with other folks in the industry, when I'm talking with other folks inside of my company, right? It's kind of sort of this philosophy that I don't know, I'm building my career off of it, I guess, right?
Indiefication. We'll talk about it in just a second. Before then, though, we've got to start at the beginning.
Sure.
When times were young and before the ring was forged. So, Buddy, I'd love to hear your origin story. Tell me about how
my
you got started
origin
in games
story. Okay, so I want to take you back, to the halcyon days. All right, of 2012. Okay, wow. The Dark Knight Rises comes out in theaters, gets absolutely trounced by the world's ending. Yeah, the Mayan calendar kind of comes to, the apocalypse kind of happens or whatever. And I graduate from college. I went to a school called Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore, and I graduated with a screenwriting degree. And so me and a bunch of my friends all moved out to LA together. We all moved to Los Angeles because we were gonna make it big. Okay,
of course, yes.
And the complicated thing about making it big in Los Angeles is that nobody pays you money, and I just didn't. And I used all my money to move. I had a car. I had about a year for rent, which was not actually a year. I was really behind on my rent for quite a while. And so I ended up picking up a job at Square Enix that I got off of Craigslist, of all places. When Final Fantasy XIV was relaunching, this was in 2013, it was about a year later. When Final Fantasy XIV was relaunching with The Realm Reborn, they were looking for game masters, right? People who could sort of administer in-game stuff between players and everything like that. And so they had these advertisements on Craigslist that were like, are you an MMO gamer? Do you understand MMO terms? And I was like, yes, I have been throwing my life away in World of Warcraft for the last 5 years. Of course I know these things, kind of thing. And so at the time, it was just my, it wasn't even a 9 to 5 because I was working the graveyard shift. I was working 8 p.m. to 5 a.m.
Wow.
And it was brutal. But I ended up working at Square Enix for 5 years. I eventually became sort of when you started when I started, I was essentially just a contractor, but eventually I became sort of a full time. I was a supervisor on the floor kind of thing. And then in 2017, I made the swap over to indie games because I had lunch with the CEO for Akupara Games. This is one of those stories that, like, I feel like nobody ever believes me when I say this. I had lunch in 2017 with this guy, and I said, hey, I'm looking to break out of my current job. I want to get into community management, right? Basically what I'm doing right now is talking to players every day. And I love that. I'm a big fan of talking to players. I understand where they're coming from. I want to make those personal one-on-one connections, all this other sort of stuff. But, I think community management is the next step up. And he was like, oh, well, I don't really have a role for you at my company now, but I could see one in like 2 years. I was like, okay, yeah, whatever, sure, right? and then and then 2 years later, he gives me a call. He's like, I'm hiring a community manager. You want to apply? And I said, sure. So
He had it in the
was
calendar that whole time. Actually, he had said it right on the very first day.
And I was when I joined Akupara, I was the 4th full-time employee, right? Most of Akupara at that point was a lot of contract stuff, just like here and there, right? Akupara has a wild story, which I guess I can explain if it comes up or whatever. But over time, the publishing side of that business has gotten bigger and bigger, and now I kind of lead up the efforts both in kind of the marketing end, which is where stuff like community management, social trailers, all that stuff lives in sort of our marketing stuff, as well as biz dev, right? So this is where Indiefication comes up, because I along with our biz dev scout and David, we're making kind of the calls on what games we're looking to sign for publishing. So yeah.
Wow.
Also, Akupara is an indie game publisher. I don't know if I mentioned that. We publish indie games.
Yes. Look up Akupara Games. It's the one with the turtle and in the tree. It's very cute logo.
Very true.
Well, what a cool story. Also, what a different time in the game industry where, like, as a backup plan, you got into games. You're like, well, shoot, I can't work anything else. I guess I'll work in freaking video games.
Yeah, I was working. I was $10 an hour. That's when I first started. I was working that Square job. That job is much better now. Actually, randomly, I went to IGN Live, which was in Los Angeles. We went to IGN Live, and I saw my old boss from Square Enix was there, and I brought him to dinner. We were going to dinner. We were getting like dinner with a bunch of people. A whole bunch of Akupara people went, and I was just like, hey, you should come. It is much nicer. So it was definitely a little different in the days of 2012.
Yes, absolutely. Beautiful. Well, so cool. I love the fact somebody in the chat there, Mike, says right place, right time. And that's very true.
Yeah.
That's something we still hear about today. Give yourself the opportunity to run into people, give yourself the opportunity to be in the right place at the right time. And you kind of need prerequisite knowledge behind you these days. You need to already have the skills ready for the right place, right time to happen. But right place, right time is like still how people get work. So for everybody listening to the first part of this, I think like find people and be in front of people and talk with them and look at Craigslist apparently.
Yeah, I mean, I just needed anything. I was actually working. I was working as an unpaid intern in Beverly Hills at a film studio, which was why I needed this night. Like this night job was so like perfect at the time. It was wild days. I'm glad I'm not that guy anymore.
Do you have any movies that you're in or that we could watch?
Oh, that's interesting. You know what I have is I actually have a lot of commercials. Actually, nice. So the weird, funny story. You know how do you guys know about how Google got in trouble with the FTC for for advertising to children? Basically, what had happened was YouTube commercials were being put up, but they were being put up as short films, not as commercials. And FTC was like, no, those short films are fucking commercials. I'm sorry. Can I swear on this podcast?
Yes, let's keep it like PG.
Okay, I will try. Yeah. I will try to be good.
Yeah.
Okay. So they were like, you can't call these short films. They are commercials. Those short films were done by a friend of mine. They actually called out the company that I had worked on for the commercials that I had written. So like that's my indirect story of how I cost Google, like it was like $250 million or something. Woo! They got fined by the FTC because I was writing short films for a big it was a toy company.
Well, so cool. I mean, I love the journey. I love the story. It's already really inspiring. I can tell, that you're really like You've got a lot of life to you. You're a really pleasant person to talk to. I can tell this is going to be a good episode. So let's talk about Indiefication for a bit, because we still don't really know what that is. You haven't told
Sure.
us.
Yes. Okay. I'll put on
Open
my
up the
Webster's
dictionary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The Indiefication is a term that I came up with. It actually goes along with two other terms that I've also talked about. One is sort of roguelitification and Souls-likeification. These are the three. The Indiefication, roguelike, and Souls-likeification are all these things that have been happening, and we've been talking about them internally because one of the parts of my job, right, is evaluating indie games that are looking for funding from publishers, right? It's the most it's just super common that I am getting submissions from game developers who are saying, hey, I have a great idea for a game, I just need 50 grand, 250 grand, 500 grand in order to finish it, right? This is the traditional sort of publisher developer kind of relationship. And this was mostly me just kind of codifying a bunch of trends that I had been seeing, right? And into kind of one location and one sort of idea. And the principle behind Indiefication is this idea that essentially AAA budgets are so huge and so wild that it's kind of impossible for some of these games to make money at current. This is something that we're seeing on the scale of like even games that are super successful, like Final Fantasy 16, right, or Final Fantasy 7. Square Enix just said those games didn't sell according to their numbers, and I'm just like, that's impossible. But the reality is, when you have a 10-year development cycle, you're paying however many hundreds of developers, it's like the budget becomes astronomical, right? And what we're seeing people leave that side of the industry. I mean, think about how many times you hear a new indie game studio gets started up by X Riot, X Blizzard, X Activision, right? X Epic developers, right? And they're working on something. Well, this is just a couple of people. This is, it tends to be 5 to 10 people, a programmer, an artist, a designer, maybe somebody who's kind of acting as a CEO. And these folks can put together an indie game that they sell for $20, right? Where they don't have to sell 50 million copies. They have to sell 50,000 copies, and they'll make money on that, right? Mm-hmm. And that's the foundation of my business model is we take games that are just solid, real games that don't need to break the bank. You don't need to go, you don't need to be at the top of, whatever, and you don't have to be Elden Ring, right? And these games make money. And so to me, this is the process of Indiefication, right? It is happening from the top down in the sense of you have industry veterans who are sort of fed up with corporate game development. To be honest, this is sort of me. This is one of the reasons why I really connected with sort of the indie game publishing environment, is because I really liked how non-corporate it was, and I think that a lot of the game developers, if you're a game developer and you're working on World of Warcraft for 5 or 10 years, that's probably fun and really exciting for a while, but eventually you're just kind of bound up by red tape. You're just kind of taking orders from bosses from up top or whatever, and you want to kind of do your own thing. These are people who are entering the indie space, and then you have Indiefication from the bottom up, where you have kids coming out of schools. I have great relationships with a ton of these kids, right? Just because, they're coming out of schools, they have prototypes, they have game ideas, they have really fresh, interesting, new ideas that they want to launch, they want to go places with, right? And the only option open to them is making indie games, right? They don't want to go be an associate game designer on, I don't know, Forza 5 or whatever, right? They want to make their own games. They kind of want to follow that passion. And so both of those forces are indifying, to, I guess, turn it into a verb, are indifying sort of the market. And this is, sort of where our company has been weirdly thriving. So yeah, that's Indiefication.
Wow, it's honestly incredibly fascinating. First of all, I love the concept of the fact that it's top down as well as bottom up. It's something that we've seen happen. There are tons of little baby startup or spin-off studios that come out of AAA expertise, but I hadn't really thought of that as this trend where it's people trying to escape the difficulties of trying to launch something from a AA or AAA size studio. And it's very true. There's like a ton of extra pressure that comes with any of these big budget games, and it's in some ways it sort of mirrors some of the problems we see in just standard capitalism, where like once you're big enough, you need so much money to sustain that it becomes unsustainable, like by its very nature.
Yeah, that is obviously super true. And I also think that the farther, the bigger the organizations get, the farther they get away from sort of their I don't even want to say their roots, but kind of their roots, right? So for instance, if you think about it, something like whatever Forza, right? Who are the people who are making decisions about Forza? Well, they're probably so far up the chain outside of social or community management or whatever, right? That they have a worse kind of finger on the pulse, which I think is probably why these AAA companies end up in controversies from time to time, right? Where you see stuff like like maybe Overwatch 2 would be an example. And to be fair, I love Overwatch 2. I have a lot of friends at Blizzard. I think that they do a great job on that game and everything, right? The boots on the ground, I think, are doing good work on that title, right? But I think the people at the top who are making the decisions are facing a lot of backlash from players because they can be disconnected. I'm the head of marketing for Akupara, right? I theoretically am the analog here, but 2 years ago, I was a community manager for Akupara, right? I built that community essentially, right? And then now I run that whole team, and I hired a community manager to sort of like take my place or whatever. But I am so much closer to those folks and to sort of the player base, and being able to connect with them and communicate with them in honest, earnest, authentic ways. One of the other things that I say all the time is we call them influencer rules, right? Which is to say that like people don't connect with brands, right? They connect with people, right? And so I'm not looking to create the Akupara brand all that much. You know what I mean? Like that's icky to me. What I want people to see my face. I want them to come to an Akupara live stream and see my face and form a connection with me, right? Or read a tweet and form a connection with my social media manager, right? Or form a connection with any of the other people who are working on our team as people, because that's just so much more powerful than, I don't know, the brand. I hate that term, to be honest.
Protect the brand at all costs.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's also interesting. So where I see, I work with tons and tons and tons and tons of juniors and people who are just learning and getting started building games. And so the bottom up aspect of Indiefication, I'm intimately familiar with. There's so much pressure. It's interesting. We had like this boon in the industry in 2020. And as a result, not just because of that, but definitely impacted by that, we have all these new people trying to break in, all these new people trying to build games. But we're having a drop off of jobs, not an increase in the number of jobs. So as a result, there's all these people who are like, man, I'm working my ass off. I've learned a bunch of stuff. I've built a bunch of cool games, and I have no chance of landing a job. Screw it. I'm going to do it myself, and I'm going to start my own company. And that part, I think, like makes a ton of sense. And it's also really exciting to me because, in my mind, indies are where it's at. Indie's everything. Indie is the artist. Indie is where it's interesting. Indie is where the stories come from, the periods of struggle, the John Carmacks and John Ramiro's, stuck in their garage making something cool and like claiming it's going to be the best game ever before they even had a demo built out. Like that's where indies are at for me. That's where games are at for me. I'd love to hear. So, the Indiefication, I don't feel like we need to talk about whether or not it's coming. It's here. It's happening. I'd love to hear, though, what are some of the implications of it? Like, what does it mean, and how is it changing the industry?
So you hit on a couple of things that I think are really interesting, right? Number one, John Carmack and John Romero would be if Doom was made today, it'd be an indie game, right?
Yes.
That was the AAA game of the early 90s, right? But I don't think, and maybe people just haven't read, is it Masters of Doom? What's that book? I read that book a long time ago.
I don't know. I saw it on the
Children of Doom? No, that's the video series.
Children of Dune is very different.
No, Children of Doom. I'm sorry. I am referencing, there's a YouTuber, his name is Aaron Signal. Honestly, he's a guy that, because of his work, I got sort of where I'm at. Eric, he is just an incredibly talented, super smart critic, and one of the things he does is he does a series called Children of Doom, where he kind of talks about the legacy of FPSs starting from Doom and then going year by year, kind of up into he's in the late 90s or something now. Maybe he's in the early 2000s. I don't remember. But anyway, John Carmack, John Romero, right? Like id was probably like a 10 or 15 person, it was such a small section of people. We would call that an indie studio these days, right? When we think of what a AAA studio, I mean, 9,000 people worked on Diablo 4, right? There 9,000 people are in the credits for Diablo 4, and frankly, good on Blizzard for crediting all of them, because most, the credits in this industry are absolutely wild. I have credits for games that I literally never touched just because of weird stuff with timeline. Anyway, so that's something that I think is sort of a marker of sort of indification, right? As we have sort of watched games get bigger and bigger and bigger, we've fallen away from a version of things where games are made in a 6 or 9 month release cycle, right? Some of the games that I'm publishing now are games that were, that they have a vertical slice, they have sort of a demo, and we will sign that game, and then 6 months later the game is out, right? Yep. And it's like you would never find a release structure like that in something like AAA. But I think a lot of the underlying sort of like a business sense of this is that, and this is where I guess I'm throwing more shade at, like, I don't know, whatever, like sort of executive tier people, right?
That's fine.
Everybody I talk to,
here.
Everybody I talk to when they're talking about getting a game signed, right? Their comparables are wild, right? So for instance, we just signed a game called we just launched a game called Ever After Falls. Ever After Falls, it's a Stardew Valley farming sim, right? People have played this. There's a lot of other cool stuff to it, and I could tell you all about that stuff, but like at the end of the fucking day, it is Stardew Valley done a little bit differently with a lot of quality of life that is going to connect with people who really love Stardew Valley, right? When we were reading the pitch deck for Ever After Falls, one of the comparables was Stardew Valley, and it's like that's like a bad idea. You are not comparable. No one is comparable to Stardew Valley. No roguelike deck builder is comparable to Slay the Spire, right? No, whatever, Metroidvania is comparable to Hollow Knight, right? These are outliers. These are grand slams. You don't need a grand slam to be successful in this business. You just need base hits, right? But the reason that people, but I'm not faulting anybody for including that stuff in their decks, right? The reason that stuff is in their decks is because it's what people expect to see. When, other folks at other studios are signing titles, they are signing titles under the sort of assumption that, oh my God, this could be the next big thing or whatever. And it's like, you don't need that. That's wild. This is sort of the bad executive thinking that I hate so much. Mm-hmm. When a game sells 50,000 copies and is a success, just be honest about that with a developer and with your company and with your team. That's the foundation of our business, basically, right? And one of the things that kind of came, I don't know, down to it is when we saw in 2023 investor money pulling out, huge layoffs across the board. So many of the people that I would consider to be sort of rivals, but like comparable to Akupara, right? These companies are having a tough time, but I think it's because they set their sights in the worst possible ways, right? One of the comparable publishers that we like a lot, I have good relationships with them, right? But the publisher sort of imploded because they had a game that sold, that game probably sold 100,000 copies, but they had promised their investors it was going to sell 1 million copies, right? Mm-hmm. And that was really the mistake. That was really the downfall. We're not in a position where any of that kind of stuff is happening, thank God, right? Just because the way that we have structured our business is pretty antithetical to that side of the company. And obviously, I'm the guy working my way up from community management, right? So I just have a completely different sort of view on how everything works and what it looks like. But this is another kind of piece of that indification puzzle, right? This is sort of proof in the pudding as I see it. When there are just really unrealistic expectations assigned to video games all the time.
Yeah, it's a bit of part of why I liken it to greater capitalism. If you're trying to raise money for a company, there's like a I remember at one point talking to an entrepreneur who was trying to raise $12 million, and he made fun of people making raising $500,000. At that time, I was looking for $300,000. By the way, he said something along the lines of like. If you're not raising $1 million, like why are you even here? If you aren't raising at least $1 million, and that kind of mentality is, I think, a bit of what you're talking about, like returning to the mentality before we were aiming for 1 million copies sold, before we were aiming for 200,000 copies sold. Games were at the beginning a fun expression. They're like a board game or something. It's like, this is a cute thing that I'm shipping off to my followers. And it, instead of trying to be these like monolithic successes that people aim for today. So in some ways that feels like a lot of what you're talking about, like return to form, where we're getting back to just making cool, fun things, and we're a little bit less worried about selling 1 million copies, and we're a little bit more worried about just making sure we have enough money to not die.
Yeah, that's absolutely true, right? I also think that, this is something I kind of see back. It happens sort of on both sides, right? Because it also happens on the side of indie developers. I had a conversation with an indie developer at an event maybe a year or two ago. This is a pretty prestigious guy. He made a game, it won an IGF award. He self-published it. He did a pretty good job, right? And I had mentioned that I was a publisher, and I was like, hey, listen, if you ever want to like sign something, he's like, okay, what kind of budgets do you deal with? And I was like, we'll publish anything. We publish zero budget games. We publish $250,000 games, right? Our business is we're like an expertise publisher, right? We're not a bank. If you need money, you got to go somewhere else, kind of thing. But if you want expertise, if you want sort of a partner to work with you on the process of getting a game out there, because maybe you're a solo dev, maybe you're just I don't know, whatever, two guys, right? And you've never made a trailer before, and you want somebody to figure that out. That's kind of us. That's our pitch, essentially. And so I kind of explained that to him, and he was like, "Wow, that is wild." Because in the circles that I run in, everybody says unless a publisher is giving you $250,000, like don't even, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And from my perspective, $250,000 is a large amount of money that I don't bet often on titles. The submissions that we get, we probably get about 100 to 150 submissions a month. And this almost sounds predatory, but I feel like I'm selling pickaxes to gold miners, right? That's the job of what a publisher is sort of here to do, and that's not a bad thing. That's just like they're looking for tools to accomplish the thing that they're kind of like looking to accomplish. But I was really surprised to hear that sort of philosophy from this guy, because from my perspective, the indie game developers are the folks who need publishers, right? And are really, really looking for that publishing support, because there are developers who are all over the globe who are fighting for, a weekend on Steam's new and trending. And I'm going to get them that weekend, kind of thing, right? But, we see people self-publish kind of into oblivion all the time. And that's just sort of an unfortunate reality.
I've done it myself. Love it. So yeah, super interesting. So here, I'm going to open it up to community questions pretty soon.
Sure.
But I'm curious now, like, what can our audience take away from this conversation or this trend? Most of the people listening to this are exactly who you're talking about. They're indie developers. They're often super early stage, so they probably have, they might have a vertical slice put together, but they probably haven't launched anything yet. What do you have to say to them? What is your takeaway, Indiefication tips for a little bit higher chance of success?
Indiefication tips. I think I'm obviously going to say this. This is, my job. I think publishers are make or break for a lot of these indie games. One of the things that we do when we're going through the evaluation process, and our evaluation process is long and it's a little bit different than other publishers. One of the foundations for our company is that our whole team has to sort of buy in to publishing a project. So it's not just me and David who are making the decision, right? I'm showing the builds for the games that we're considering to the people working on the team, because I want them to go, I'm excited about this. I'm into this, right? Some of the titles that we have published and that we have turned into successes essentially were because like I fought for it really hard and I had a bunch of really cool, interesting kind of marketing ideas to kind of get it out there and make that game kind of a success. What we see sort of unprofessional, I would call them, sort of like pitches all the time, right? But the thing that excites me about working with a developer is when the it's not when the pitch itself is complete, it's actually when it's incomplete, which is a counterintuitive sort of thing. People will make pitch decks, and people will make vertical slices that are too rounded at the edges. And what it does is it makes me feel like I sit down, I play the game for 5 minutes, I come to understand the gimmick, and I go, oh, that's it. There's nothing more. I don't see how we can build out a whole game from here, right? But an example of a really great pitch that I got, and this is from one of our most successful titles, is called Estrella. It's made by a Brazilian studio, really talented developer called Little Leo. Their pitch and their vertical slice to us was super simple. It is a Slay the Spire roguelike deck builder, but you roll dice instead of drawing cards. That's it. You roll dice. That's it. They had one character out of their 6 planned, and they had one boss, sort of like run or whatever out of a bunch more kind of like planned. But I got out of that demo and I told David, I said, we have to sign this game. We have to sign this game today. Someone's going to snatch it up. It's so good. And the reason that vertical slice, that demo was so good, was because it was incomplete. Because I could see, oh my God, I understand how I could sink 300 hours into this. And I eventually would go on to do so, right? My played on Steam for Estrella is something like 450 hours at this point, right? And so I really would encourage people when you're making a demo, when you're making a pitch deck, you got to help me imagine what the rest of the game is going to look like. Don't make the most polished, beautiful 5% you can, because that's just going to make me feel like the game is 5% of what it could be. Show me how that 5% leads to the rest of the 95%. It's my biggest piece of advice.
Yeah, I love that. I think like a big part of what we're talking about here, Indiefication, coming back to sort of the roots of where we began as an industry, getting smaller, moving from massive demand, massive amounts of sales to a little bit enough to survive. It all kind of sums up in the same way, which is I feel like we're just getting. You said it earlier, and maybe it's like we're getting back to the roots, like. When you get into that room with that publisher, it's not like I get a lot of students who think it's going to be this like formal, really intense thing, and they have to like be prepared with all the numbers and like a little bit, but mostly it's just kind of a conversation, and it's just hanging out, and it's just trying to get a fellow dork, because the publishers are also dorks, except they're really huge ones, excited about your game. That's it. Let's get pumped up together. I have this cool idea. I think it's gonna be really cool. Like, let me show you. That I think is a solid pitch more than anything else. I think this is going to be so fun. Let me show you why I think it's going to be so fun.
Yeah, that's really what it comes down to.
That's game dev. All right. I love it. It has been such a good conversation so far. It's time for us to open it up to some community questions. So I'm going to get Mike on stage for the very first one. Mike, would you like to hop up and ask your very first question?
Welcome.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, indeed.
Hey, Willem. Hey, buddy.
Hi.
So I just wanted to ask, what advice do you have for indie dev studios in terms of establishing their studio brand and their brand voice? Brand. Sorry,
yeah, brand. Number one really is influencer rules. I have a friend who's a YouTuber, and we got like dinner or something. It was actually sort of lunch that became dinner. We went to a Japanese barbecue place for like 4 hours. And one of the things that he kept talking about was sort of like authenticity, right? And he was sort of talking about how that's like in the YouTube game, that's the only thing that matters, right? You need to make an authentic relationship with the people on the other end of, the people on the other end of the screen, the people in your comment section, right? The people who are going to be your whatever Patreon subscribers, whatever, right? The indie game version of that is your fans, right? And I think people do connect to authenticity. They connect to, honestly, like faces and names and people much more than they do with like like a brand, right? One of the things that I've started doing for our games is I'm doing these TikToks that are just my face, where I just one of the games we published called Critmaster, there were these questions: do we use generative AI in Critmaster? Because the whole hook for Critmaster is there's a narrator, the Critmaster, who's in your head the whole time, right? And people are like, oh my god, this is so crazy, what a cool use of generative AI. And I was like, no, somebody recorded all those lines. We wrote all those lines and we recorded them. And when I didn't communicate that as the brand. I just put the camera at my face and I told people that, right? And that, it's not the most viral hit of all time or anything along those sorts of lines. But it was definitely enough to get people to understand, like, oh yeah, I understand. These are people on the other end, right? It's not this dysmorphous, company or anything like that where you can kind of you can sort of lose the humanity in it, right? I think it makes people feel better about interacting with you because they feel like they're interacting with another person. They're not feeling that they're talking to a robot. Like, you can imagine how frustrating it might be, right, when somebody calls a customer service hotline for like a huge corporation and they get run through the ringer on these robocalls or whatever. Part of the reason that's frustrating is you're not making an authentic communicate, like you're not communicating authentically with another person, right? So when I'm talking stuff about brand stuff, it's that, right? It's just about being honest, being authentic, and trying to strip away a lot of sort of the artifice that comes with people's sort of natural inclinations when they're thinking about brand identity.
Nazareth in the comment says, empathy does wonders. Who knew?
Who knew? Yeah.
Nobody could have guessed. I love that. Does that answer your question, Mike?
Awesome. Just real quick. So let's say me, Willem, and Buddy are part of the community management team because we're an indie studio and we're all having a lot of hats. How do you get everyone aligned with kind of still being that humanity, but not making it so obvious that Willem is posting cats and I'm posting, memes and all this stuff? So how do we align on that brand voice?
I think we have a face of the company. I'm the face of the company. That's why I'm on this podcast, right? When you guys reached out, you initially reached out to Xavier. He's my PR guy. He does press and stuff like that or whatever. And Xavier tossed it to me because part of my job is I go on the podcast and I talk about sort of Akupara and Rain World and all this stuff, right? So I think it's great to sort of have somebody sort of opt into that role of being the face of the company. Another thing that I do is I just kind of look at folks who this is actually how I got the job at Akupara in the first place. The thing that I said in my interview that got me the job as community manager was I talked about other community managers in the field who I admired and respected, right? At the time, this was a woman named Grace who worked for Creative Assembly for a title that I really connected to. There was another guy named Chris who worked on another sort of like title. And the thing that, David said that he was like, the reason that you got hired was because nobody else who hired for this role in community management cared about it, like had that on their minds at all. They weren't looking to peers in the industry for what to do. Who are the people who you look up to? Who are the people who you are trying to like match, essentially? So on that end, I would recommend people like Xavier Nelson from Strange Scaffold, somebody I'm paying a lot of attention to, who I'm aping right now. Victoria Tran, obviously everybody knows Victoria Tran. She's at Inner Sloth. Paige Wilson, Agrocrab does a great job at this, right? Like, these are all examples of folks who I think do it right, because they have people at their studio who really kind of opt into that role in a pretty good public facing way. So yeah.
That's a really interesting
awesome.
one.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mike, for asking the question. That's something we can absolutely bring to our students, actually, the student teams, and having one person on each team just opt into being the face. Super simple piece of actionable advice. I love those. Rick, next community question, please.
Yeah, so I'm interested in your idea of partnerships with the indie studios. Obviously, the role of the indie is to build a fun game, find something that's unique, innovative, going to be a lot of fun to play, that will draw you in for hundreds of hours. So that takes its own set of skills that they develop. I'm curious, when you're working with a studio, what are the skills that are okay for them to not have? And then in that, what is the ideal studio for you to work with?
So part of the pitch for this is not how every indie publisher works. Like I said, there's some publishers who are just banks, right? You are going to get a chunk of change. Outer Sloth is a good example of this. They're technically not publishing. They're a fund, but whatever, is pretty close. If you want cash, you go to Outer Sloth and they will give you cash, and that's kind of it, right? And that's fair enough. There are people who just want cash, and they're very successful just getting cash, essentially, right? The pitch for Akupara, and for a number of other publishers who we would think of as being kind of like comparables, there's a million of these, right? Is that we bring expertise to the table, right? So for instance, the core thing that people who we partner with that are looking for is they are looking to offload all of these aspects of the job that they don't want to think about. They don't really want to be thinking about making trailers. They want us to make the trailers for them. They don't really want to be thinking about like running the community Discord too much. They want us to be running the community Discord. They don't really want to be thinking about writing press releases. They want us to write press releases, right? Which isn't to say that they don't do those things. Every developer, I have an expectation that developers who I'm going to work with are going to put in the legwork, especially around launches. Because that matters. But a lot of the time what's happening, kind of the trade-off that's happening is people are going, you know what, I'm going to bring in a publisher, and the publisher is just going to handle all of this overhead that I don't want to deal with. I don't know how to port to the Nintendo Switch. I don't know how to cut a trailer. I don't know how to, get influencers, right? I'm gonna sign with a publisher who's gonna help me do sort of that stuff. And so that's really the division of labor that we tend to see, that we tend to look for, that we tend to sort of sign. An extra part of this is that Akupara, we don't like agencies. This is another thing that I've built my career on. I think agencies are kind of a scam. What happens with agencies is, and to be fair, I have a lot of friends who work at agencies, and I don't want to be too harsh, but I'm gonna be a little harsh. What happens with the agencies is they are mercenary. They come in, they do the job, they get out. They don't connect to a title. One of the things that makes Akupara different and unique is, like my trailer editor is in-house. He is on that project from the day we sign to the day it launches, to past the day it launches, right? And he is going to be way more connected to the title. He's going to have a much better understanding of where it's at, what it needs, what it's looking for, than, somebody who signs a 3-month contract with an agency where, they're just trying to churn these out, right? Because they don't have a real stake in the game's success in the way that a publisher sort of does. I don't know if that's a great answer to your question, but that's sort of where I think about this sort of thing.
It definitely is. It sounds like the skills that you're allowed to lack depends on who you partner with your publisher.
Yeah, I mean, there are certain developers of ours who are really hands-on. They like doing kind of like, for instance, the patch notes process, right? Where they want to be the ones who are updating Discord all the time, right? They want to be the ones who are updating in the Steam backend or whatever. I'm happy to let those developers kind of go wild with it. But then there are other publishers other developers who are looking for us to do that stuff, right? When they have a patch that's going to go out, they're just going to dump the changelog and expect me to write the patch notes, and that's great. I will do that, right? I know how to write fun, interesting patch notes, and I will have, I will put that up for them essentially. So yeah, it's a little different for everybody.
Yeah, that's the second part of the question. It sounds like there's different things that your partners will do. Like, describe what the ideal behaviors are out of your partner.
Oh yeah, so the ideal behaviors out of a partner, God, that's actually kind of a little bit complicated. Publishers are force multipliers. You can't, and this will sometimes happen, is developers will think because they sign with a publisher, it's the publisher's job to kind of get the game over the finish line. At the end of the day, the thing that sells the game is the game itself. The best thing that a publisher can do is get more eyes on it, is answer sort of the discoverability problem. I understand how to build a Steam page to ride the discoverability algorithm, right? And I can get eyes on our Steam page, and I have strategies for Steam Next Fest, and I know how to, I set the release dates for all of our games because I know how to ride new and trending, right? Which is a huge part of sales, right? Especially when what you're looking for are these base hit numbers, right? 25,000, 50,000 copies makes a success. Cool. All I need to do is hit new and trending for 4 days. If I can land that, I'm solid, kind of thing, right? The ideal developer is somebody who really understands kind of that they can empower me to do that, and working with me and my team sort of efficiently and effectively is going to be the way to make that force multiplier as strong as it possibly can be. It is hard to describe how much better my team works on projects where we have really, really good relationships with our developers versus projects where we have friction with our developers, right? And some of that stuff is just about, I don't know, trusting us to get things done. And also just kind of letting things go in a way that is frankly not natural for artists, right? Artists want to hold on, right? They want to hold on to everything. But one of the things that I learned at college is you got to divorce ego from that. right? So anyway, I guess that would be my ideal partner, someone who works really well with us and has a good understanding of what we bring to the table and can empower us to bring as much of that we can.
Thank you.
Awesome. Well said. All right, it is time for the question of the day, where we reiterate one of the things that we learned from Buddy here in order to help it sink in better. The person who answers answers this question correctly in chat first gets 3 points for the House Cup. And the question is, what release schedule? How many months does Buddy recommend for Indiefication? It can vary a lot, I understand, Buddy, but you threw out a number and it's a thing people ask all the time. 6 months, yes. Mark and Nick are. Mark, you wound up getting it. Mark, let us know which house you want to give those points to. It is indeed 6 months to as long as I think you said 9 months, Buddy. Is that about right?
Yeah, I mean, we'll sign projects way far out than that. We have projects that we're signing right now for 2026, but the launch window, what I consider to be our release window for a game, is 6 months, right? You have the run up to release, and then you have your release date announcement, and honestly, I like to do 2 or 3 weeks later, the game comes out, right? You do your release announcement, you do your launch, you bundle all that stuff tight and together, and that's how I recommend it and head to people. So yeah.
Super cool. Awesome. All right, we've got time for probably 1 or 2 more questions. I'm going to ask this one for Doug. Doug does not have a mic, so I'm going to ask it for you. Here's the question. Is there a fundamental supply and demand issue where there are just too many good games and not enough publisher marketing money to support marketing?
I would probably say yes, which is pretty bad for me. But the reality is that this is the backstory of Akupara. Akupara started as a developer. We were an indie game developer, right? And we essentially started a publishing wing because we kind of self-published our first game, and we had friends who basically said, "Hey, you published this game. Can you publish our game?" And we said, "Sure," right? And this is where I kind of came in. This is where I got brought in. That side of the company, that was maybe 15%, maybe 1/6 of what the company was working on 6 years ago. Now it's almost all of what we're working on, because the successful side of our company is publishing. People need publishing, and really talented publishers, publishers who care and understand developers and understand the development kind of pipeline and work towards really strong strong relationships with our folks. So at this point, Akupara Games is the indie game publisher. We're not really the indie game developer anymore, right? You've probably played stuff that we've worked on, right? We did the Dead by Daylight dating, the Loverwatch, the Overwatch dating sims, right? We did both of those kind of things. But at the end of the day, the thing that is driving the market right now is there are so many good games that need good publishers, and we happen to be one of those. So,
good publisher. You heard it here first.
True.
Haley, I want to get you up on stage for your next question. I am uncertain if you're coming up. If you don't come up in a second, I will ask your question for you. Oh, hey, you're here.
Hello, I'm so sorry. I was playing Final Fantasy 14, but I'm here.
God, what a game!
Best excuse.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me look at my exact question so that I could ask it properly. But the TLDR of it was that how do you, I guess, prevent these Indiefication studios from becoming the same thing that they swore to destroy? How do we stop that, I guess, since money is known to change people? Or what would you give words?
The scale of money is never going to be enough to in my experience personally, right? We've had some truly insane successes with our titles, right? But honestly, the thing that I have found is that when we have successful titles, the people who are working on indie, they just want to do more of that, right? The reality is there's really no ladder from being a 2-person indie game team to being a AAA, I don't know, 150-person team putting out a title like that. I don't see that kind of thing happening. I see kind of slow, mitigated kind of growth. At most, what you tend to see is you get a 2-person team that balloons to 10 people, right? But a 10-people company is still in this sort of scale of id from the early 90s, right? Like that Doom scale we kind of talked about. And so fundamentally, I think it's just I have never seen an indie studio that starts as small as the studios that we publish and gotten as big as some of this other stuff. And I think a lot of that, I mean, I don't know, maybe it could happen, but just none of the people that I have ever worked with have ever sort of demonstrated that sort of I guess I would say in practice.
I think there's always it always could happen. I mean, we're talking about id.
Yeah.
It was at one point 2 people. But that was, I mean, how many decades ago now? That was a while ago now.
I would not be surprised if something like Supergiant or, you know, Team
Right.
Cherry maybe could fall under, you know, the Shovel Knight. Actually, that would be the best example. Shovel Knight, Platonic. These would be 2 sort of indie studios that kind of like branch out. I mean, Platonic is now a publisher, but those would maybe be the best examples. But because those sort of home runs are so insanely rare, I don't know that I would even say, and even then, like, do I think of even the recent Shovel Knight stuff, the Shovel Knight news that's kind of like coming out now? Does that feel like AAA news to me? Kind of not really. So yeah, I don't know. I feel like once people find this indie space and they get sort of successful in this indie space, it's not all that common that folks want to bring it back to that kind of AAA level. What tends to happen is, you know, these like minor AAA companies will sort of start up. Greg Street from Riot just sort of did this, where he just kind of made his own small AAA studio, and that's already going to be, you know, a couple dozen people essentially. So yeah.
Very interesting. I think it's worth thinking about for basically how we don't re-corrupt our little indie studios. But I think it is also probably accurate that the vast majority of us won't need to worry about it. I think here's maybe my answer to you, Haley. If and when that happens, let's chat it out. But it probably won't. Awesome. So we are about at time. I've got 2 things to do before we say goodbye. The first one, Buddy, is the interesting one. I would love for you to assign a piece of homework to the listeners here. Something they can do in the next week, in about an hour, to practice some of what we talked about here, Indiefication, or something else.
Okay, yeah. So the thing that I had sort of prepared for this, I didn't really get into, but I do want to quickly explain. This is another piece, this part of how we do our business. I evaluate our business in 4 levels, okay? Really quickly. Bottom level, we call this non-compliance. This is when you are doing below minimum standard, right? This is a studio's about to go out of business because they are screwing up kind of performance, right? Next level up, you have minimum compliance. These are people who are doing the sort of the bare minimum, right? They're not really breaking the bank. They're not really putting in any extra effort, but they're getting the job done. They're doing just kind of fine. Next step up is what we call best practices. Best practices is where you are looking at leaders in the industry, right? And you are emulating the stuff that they are doing, right? So if I look at comparables, like I had mentioned before, you know, Aggro Crab, Strange Scaffold, right? Like Inner Sloth. If I'm looking at them as my comparables and I'm emulating the things that they're doing, I am behaving sort of in best practices. And then leadership is when you are best practices for other folks in the industry. When people are looking to you for this kind of stuff, this is the sort of pinnacle that you can achieve sort of in the market, in the industry. I'm talking about this all the time with my team because I want Akupara to, you know, have best practices leadership, that kind of thing. Sort of in thinking in line with that question that I had answered that got me this job, right? That I had comparables, nobody else did, right? It wasn't even they didn't ask the question, who are other people in the industry that you look up to? I just volunteered that information or another sort of question. But I think that is the most important thing that anybody can demonstrate to me in the hiring process or anything kind of along those lines. If somebody is looking to break into the industry, I want them to show me that they are paying attention to these best practices, these leadership level studios, right? Who are the people you are looking up to? Who are the people that you are emulating? What are the specific things that they are doing that you find to be insightful, impactful, right? That you think is going to be, is going to translate to some sort of level of success. So that would be the homework kind of question, is who are the people that you are looking up to? Who are the people that you think of as doing best practices in the industry? And if I were asking that question in a job interview, hey, who are some folks that you look up to in the industry? Who are some people you want to emulate? What would the answer to that question be?
That's awesome. Nice. It's a really simple one. So your homework is to write about who your best practices are, who your leaders are, what they're actually doing, who you look up to, and how you are incorporating or learning from what they're doing. Super good one. I would love to see that written out on LinkedIn. You can tag the Indie Game Academy and you can tag Buddy. You can look up Buddy Sola, Sola, and tag us, and we'll say nice things and comment on your post.
Yeah.
All right. So it is the end of the episode. Before we say goodbye, Buddy, is there anything you want to plug here or any last messages you want to give to the listeners?
Thank you so much for having me. I really, listen, I really appreciate it. I thought you guys asked some really good questions. I know there's a million questions in the chat that I didn't get to. I told myself I am going to go in and just write out some answers to some of these later today. I'm walking into 5 hours of meetings after this. So it'll probably be kind of later in the day. We'll burn a little of that midnight oil, okay? That 8 p.m. to 5 a.m. sort of goodness. But I do want to get to those. I do want to get to some of the other questions I saw because I thought they were really good. I don't know. The only thing I want to plug is I don't know, my stuff. Listen, look at Akupara Games. We're doing interesting stuff. If you have games that you want to pitch, you can feel free to get in touch with us. We have a whole contact form on the website, or you can feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn or Twitter. I handle game pitches all day, every day. So I'd be really happy to talk with any of you. So anyway, that's it from me.
Awesome. All right. We'll include any links down below, including the submission link for Akupara Games. Definitely check them out. They're one of the people changing the face of the industry and bringing us back to those roots. Thank you, Buddy, for such a wonderful conversation. This was a ton of fun. You've got a great attitude, great energy, and I'm looking forward to learning more. As always, we'll be here again Wednesday at 12 p.m. Eastern Time. There's links to join down below, and we'll see you next time. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.